What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Mindset Podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, and I feel like I always keep saying we have a special guest because all of our guests are special in their own way. But today, we are joined by Matt Haggman, who wears many different hats, and I'm just excited to pick his mind a little bit. He's all over the place. You open LinkedIn, he's there. You open Facebook, he's also there. You can't miss him. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Anthony. It's great to be with you and you and Gabe. This is a
Yeah.
real honor.
No,
So
thank
thank you.
you. And it's not every day we can have someone who is a candidate for Congress, and we're just going to jump right in. We were told that we can ask the hard
Woo.
hitting questions. So here we go. Um, and, it's really interesting your journey and how you've developed and how you've gone from journalism to business to investing in Miami to politics. Sticking on the politics for a second here, what was the most significant life lesson you learned from your campaign in Congress? Working myself for a campaign for school board not too long ago, I've seen
Cool.
how challenging it can be. I can only imagine something as big as Congress and the lessons you've learned, the hurdles you've had to overcome. What kind of life lessons do you take away from that experience of campaigning?
Absolutely. And just for quick context, I came to Miami to work as a journalist, which I did for 10 years. And we'll talk about, all that time, most of that time at the Miami Herald, and then went to Knight Foundation, where I had an opportunity to launch a whole new initiative. And we'll talk about that, about, launching an initiative to build what was then a far-fetched idea of building a tech and startup community in Miami and launching that. But then hit a point, and now, of course, leading this initiative called Opportunity Miami, which we'd love to talk about. But when I was at Knight Foundation, hit a point in my life I'd never been involved in politics, and just felt like this is a moment. It was a moment in life, a moment professionally to do something different. And after more than 6 years at Knight Foundation, resigned my role to run for Congress, to up and run, which is this amazing experience. Literally to clean out my office, drive home, here to our home. My wife, Danette Linares, who's in this extraordinary commercial real estate executive, came home and sat down. It's like, all right, how do we let's figure out running for Congress, right? So that in and of itself, just as a starting point, was an extraordinary experience of just building that muscle of taking that leap, right? Of like, I've never done this before. But one thing I can do is is try to figure things out and really stick with it and continue to learn and grow. And running a campaign is very much that, because suddenly there you are, confronted with a brand new thing. And it's very much, it's like launching a startup. You got to go fundraise, you got to build a team, you got to build a strategy, and then do it over and over again. But in terms of sort of lessons from that whole experience as a candidate for Congress, you know, number one, of course, was just being reminded how much I love people and their own stories. The journalist in me. I mean, the thing I loved more than anything else, as being a candidate, was going out and knocking on doors, meeting people where they are, at their front door, learning about their concerns, their aspirations. That's something that I loved most of all about being a candidate, sort of being out in the community and seeing both the good and the bad. I remember one time going to, this was like, 7 o'clock on a weekday evening, knocked on a door, someone opened it, and there was this teenager there with a big beaming smile, with parents beaming behind her. And I said, hi, my name is Matt Haggman, running for Congress. And they were looking at me with just such excitement. I said, so there's some, what's going on, you guys? There's some big news. And the teenager at the door, she had just been accepted to college, right? And so it's like this moment where I could join in celebrating with them. It's like, congratulations, this is such great news. So you could be there, part of that really important life experience. Alternatively, I remember one time, again, it was, in the evening, knocking on doors, and I'd gone to a door and and um, and knocked, and no one had come to the door, and I'm walking away, and a car pulls up in the driveway, and a woman gets out, and she says, can I help you? And I walk up and I say, my name's Matt Haggman, running for Congress. And she says, oh, hi, it's a pleasure to meet you. She just had this sad look on her face. I said, is everything okay? And she said, I was just diagnosed with cancer. And she said, I just need a hug. And of course gave her a hug. But it was, I share that because, by being as a candidate, by being out in the community, meeting people where they are, you're seeing life in all its forms. And I know that, one of the things that I was reminded on throughout that whole experience was how much, that, being with people, understanding their own concerns, their challenges, their aspirations. That's what I love most about being a candidate. Less so the fundraising and the politicking and on who's up and who's down, much less of that. But that's what I love most of all. And so, whatever I do professionally, always want to be sure that people, their stories, that's part of whatever it is that I'm doing. And the other thing, just very briefly, would share is that for being a candidate, and this being the Mindset podcast, um, is um, is a lesson from being a candidate that you carry through in everything that you do is an ability to quickly let things go and move on to the next. Throughout, as you know, from working on campaigns throughout the course of a day, there are a million things that can come up that, an awkward encounter or some critique or something, right? That can throw you a little bit. You're like, wait, what was that about? Right. And that happens so many times during the course of a day as a candidate. Of course, you want to have a way to absorb that and reflect on that, but you need to really, calibrate that in a way where you don't get sidetracked, that you're then once again in the moment, in the present, engaging and thinking about sort of what's next, so I'd say those are the two lessons, with a really long answer
Yeah,
to your
and
pretty short
Matt,
question.
you can't forget
Those
the
are
really good tan that you get because you're out there in the sun all the time, and you can't get all the you
that's,
can't forget all the 10,000 plus steps that you get every day. Hey, those are two benefits right there off the bat.
oh man, we had some days where we eclipsed 25,000 steps. It was
Yeah,
great, like next
yeah.
level. It
It's
was
next level.
awesome.
It's like the ultimate, like, marathon, like walking marathon. It's so much fun. And,
It it
you bring
is.
up such a good point and, about, like, having to move on quickly because 'cause I've also experienced situations where maybe people aren't the friendliest or they say something right that might, rub you the wrong way, and if you stay on that or rather, like you said, Matt, if you dwell on what that person said or what they did, the way they treated you, it can ruin the rest of your day or even the rest of your week, and as you know, Matt, time is of the essence. Like, your mind has to be with it 24/7. And I love how you compared it to a startup. I never thought of it like that, but it's so true. You have to fundraise, you have to network, you have to have hours of knocking on doors and then automatically put on a suit and tie and go to a restaurant to network and to get money. It's really interesting, like
Totally.
the how quick you have to turn around as a candidate. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, of how quickly you have to turn around and put on a smiling face even if you're exhausted after a whole week of knocking on doors?
Yeah, no, it's you really have to have, you have to be resilient, right? You need to be able to quickly, after a long day, gather yourself, as you said, and go to some event that evening, organize your thoughts, say, okay, here are the 3 points that I want to get across tonight, right? And be able to leave that other stuff behind, maybe that challenging conversation that you had, to be able to not dwell on that too much. That's a real skill, right? And then to be able to do it over and over and over again, right? And whether it's as a political candidate, whether it's as an elected official, whether it's in business, whatever, it's leading a nonprofit, that success is ultimately built on the ability not to be able to do it once or twice, to do it over and over, weeks and months, and to stack, one successful day on top of another. And that's, I think, ultimately, that's one of the great lessons of going through an experience like that. But you also touched on something I think that's really important to, as for anyone thinking about getting involved in politics. One of the challenges too with all of this in a campaign is that the clock is always ticking, right? The one difference from, say, a startup to a certain extent is that there's no delaying product launch, right? That is that election day is election day. And so every hour lost, there's no getting that hour back. And so that's something, that an added pressure, that is specific to a campaign, that I think is helpful, right? Carrying that with you and understanding that.
Yeah, man. I think the key to any type of success is consistency, right? And like you mentioned, it's not only being resilient, but it's being able to put that smile on your face day in and day out. And we were talking about the heat right now off the air, and I just couldn't help but think back to some advice that one of my coaches gave me when I was playing in high school, and he said, "Have short-term memory." Right. And he was at the time referring more to, if you miss a shot, don't get down on yourself. get back down the floor, play defense, and you'll get the next shot on the next run. And I couldn't help but think about that analogy, thinking about what you're saying, because, here you are telling us these stories that are really, vulnerable. And I appreciate you for this, for sharing those. And it's also one extreme and the other, right? It's someone getting into school and getting into college, one of the best days of their life, and maybe some of the most dark and scary days of their life, getting diagnosed with cancer. And that could have maybe happened hours apart, for you, and being able to experience both of those highs and lows. But it's having that short-term memory for you to be able to say, okay, I'm part of this, I'm part of that, but let's keep it running, let's turn it around, and let's keep it going. I think that's so powerful, and it's such a huge lesson for so many people. But I did want to go back a second, because while you were speaking, I couldn't help but think you were mentioning something that you, after being at the Miami Herald, you went to the Knight Foundation, then you were presented with the opportunity to run for Congress, and it was something that you had never done before, something completely out of the ballpark. And I want to know. I was curious, what was the first thing you did when you made that decision? You packed up your bags, you went home. I'm running for Congress. What was the first thing? Because I feel like a lot of people listening to this podcast might have ideas about what they want to do. They have no idea how to do it. Right. I think there's a lot of steps and steps to action that people need to take in order to make that dream or that idea a reality. So I'm just curious to know, back when that was, what was your first step? What was your initial thought when you decided, okay, I'm running for Congress? What's next?
Well, so I think the first step of all for me, of course, was talking to Danette, right? My wife, my life partner. We do everything together, and of course, being sure that this is something that she, even before making the decision, lots of conversations that deciding that this is something that we want to do together. Um, the second thing is that when you decide to make the leap, oftentimes for anyone doing this, the first feeling that you feel is amazing anxiety, right? You're like, I don't know the next step to take, and I'm trying to figure it out. So I would say, at its most basic, the first thing it did was to take that next step, right? Whatever it might be, right? And so, for me, one of the things, of course, I think for any candidate you need to think hard about is to understand why you are doing it, right? Get hold of your why, which can be very hard, right, as a candidate, right? It's and so in understanding that. Um, but then it got down to really sort of the practicalities of trying to bring in the team, and so I was reaching out to friends about sort of who was going to be part of our campaign team, to understand that and understand what that looks like, and then of course to get about what it is sort of the day to day. And I had to learn how to fundraise. I had never done that before, and blocking out that time to do that. So I guess that's a bit of a winding answer to your question about the first thing, but the first thing was to ultimately to take a step and to keep taking steps, even if you're unsure about what that is. But for me, it was finding out that, trying to get clear on that why, then building that team, getting some real expert advice of what a campaign needs to do, and then getting about doing that. And of course, one of those things that, say what you will about our politics, in modern politics today, certainly running for Congress, you have to go raise money. And so to begin doing that and picking up the phone
Yeah.
and say, I'm taking this leap. I'd love to have you with me. Would you
Mhm.
contribute to this effort?
Now, Matt, you live and breathe Miami. Essentially, you are Miami,
Oh,
right?
I
You
appreciate
you
that. Thank
you
you.
interview some of the brightest minds. I know you were with the mayor not too long ago on a stage, and you do a lot of great work here in Miami. And you really invest in Miami. And what I love to see is not only were you trying to help Miami, your city, in by being in the political arena, but you said, okay, that didn't work. Well, how else can I help Miami? And you get involved in different places. And I love that about you, Matt. I'm curious, as your time as a journalist, you've mentioned in other interviews that I've seen that you've seen the best of Miami through your job as a journalist, and also maybe not so great things of Miami, because you would investigate and get to the bottom of different issues, which is what a journalist should do, and you did it very very well. So I applaud you
Thank
for that. I'm curious to know, in your time as being a journalist, what's a maybe a story that just has never left your mind, something that impacted you in whatever kind of way that you might want to share with us.
Sure. Well, I mean, so as a reporter, I first covered lawyers, covered legal affairs, then I covered real estate, followed developers around, worked as an investigative journalist, and then covered Miami-Dade County government, right? So followed lawyers, developers, and local elected leaders around. So I always look at this like it was like a graduate course in Miami, and really seeing and being able to really sort of see under the hood. I guess, there were so many, but, certainly one that comes to mind was my last beat covering the Miami-Dade County Commission. And, this was going back, this is during, as we're still sort of coming out of the recession, the Great Recession, and was writing about how government leaders, we were in many ways sort of enriching themselves at the expense of a public that was really struggling to scrape by, and wrote a series of stories about that the community really responded to, and ultimately, of course, launched a whole recall effort. And so to see that of the recall effort of the Miami-Dade County mayor at the time, and so to see how, if you're to sort of clearly present, a set of facts to a community and let them decide, and then to see how they may respond to that, that was extraordinary, right? And I think, with anything that, sharing with a community and trusting in them that whatever decision that they make will be the right one, but trying to help present, the facts and the situation as clear as you can, and then let other folks make that decision. That was really instructive. And in this case, folks, were pretty unhappy about what they were learning, and ultimately responded, in a really clear way. Ultimately a recall of the mayor, and eventually even imposing term limits on Miami-Dade County commissioners, which has now, several years later, resulted in a complete shift of the membership of our county commission. But by the way, if I might, that's the world of the journalist and writing these stories, truth to power, and all that stuff, and holding the powerful to account. Um, during all that time, covering elected leaders and developers and attorneys, what I found was just a love of Miami, right? And that's why I chose then to go to Knight Foundation, because honestly, as a journalist, even though I share all of that, and I loved being a journalist, I didn't want to be in a role where I was constantly pointing out what's wrong, right? I wanted to be in a role where I could also try and sort of drive change and highlight what's right and what we can be doing. And so that's why ultimately I decided to leave the Miami Herald and go to Knight Foundation, where I had this opportunity to think completely anew about sort of what's next for Miami, and
Sure.
launch an effort to build that idea.
Sure, sure. And Matt, a lot of young people that we speak to, maybe even people that are studying communications or journalism, I'll be honest with you, a lot of them have concerns about the future of journalism and reporting, as we've seen nationally, even locally, the polarization of politics, and how that gets involved in journalism, what's real, what's not real, what news source or outlet you can count on. I'm curious to know your thoughts. Are you hopeful that things will kind of relax a little bit and journalism will be journalism, or do you think we're just gonna get deeper in that polarization of journalism?
Well, you know, I'll start from a place of I'm a prisoner of hope, right? That certainly coming to this from an optimistic, hopeful viewpoint, as much as telling in broad strokes the story I just told about being a journalist and writing about electeds. At the end of the day, I'm very hopeful and optimistic about where we go next, and I'm very hopeful about journalism. We are at a point in time where, sort of as a world, as a country, there's a lot there. We have enormous divides and polarization, right? And but I am certainly one that I think that we agree in a lot more than we disagree, and finding ways to sort of to 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 really deepen that, 90, 85, 90% that we agree on. And then we can figure out the 10 to 15% that we don't, but not let that be something that gets us in the way of solving so many of our big problems. Um, and so, yes, I think that we are that that journalism will get to a better place, and I think there's extraordinary journalism going on right now. Sometimes we really have to look hard to find it. But journalists are really doing, they're doing God's work. They're telling the story of, of people around the world. And the more people that do that and really, in clear, smart, reasonable, human ways, the better.
Yeah, and Matt, I'm glad you mentioned a few minutes ago that you're not only there to report the bad stories, you're also striving to find the good stories, probably more than the bad. And I feel like that might be something that to Anthony's point, you watch all these Netflix shows and all these different things on TV, and the reporter's always the bad guy for whatever reason. He's always the one getting in the way. He's always the one trying to get down to the bad story and trying to blame everybody. But I liked what you said about having hope and really trying to strive to find those good stories because let's be honest, you turn on the news, you see more bad than good. And I want to ask you, what advice might you have for maybe, a young reporter, someone that wants to get into journalism, but to Anthony's point, might be a little stricken with, some caution, if you will, because they're so nervous about the way they're going to come off, or they're only going to be the one getting all those negative stories. And what can you tell that person, or even tell yourself when you might have been starting out, if you had any of those concerns yourself, to start off in that career?
The most important thing is starting, right? That's
Mhm.
number one. Start, right?
Yeah.
Start writing. I remember as a when I was in grade school watching games and writing stories about the games. You know, I never became that sports writer. Maybe someday, but I love that. And so number one is starting and being willing to put yourself out there, right? To write a story, to have go through the experience of being edited, to get feedback from readers. That's really important because, like anything, you need to put that time in, right? There's no substitute for doing. And so that's what I would say to the aspiring journal. One, to the aspiring journalists, do it, right? That it's really important work. We need more really good journalists in the world. There's so many issues that we need to understand better, and journalists are the people to help us do that. And for those who aspire to that, you know, start.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite is Glenna Milberg on Channel 10. She does
Sure.
a
Yeah.
wonderful
Yeah.
job, and there's so many local journalists who do great work. And definitely, I think you're right on, Matt. I think what separates a good leader or somebody very who does a great job in their profession versus someone who doesn't is just getting started, executing. I think execution is one of my frames here in the back. It's just the execution. I think is a big part of separating the people who have dreams and the people who actually get those dreams done. But to just turn the table here a little bit, Matt, I do want to talk about your role at the Beacon Council because it's
Sure.
so fascinating. You can help a lot of people with the role that you have. So maybe you can share with us a little bit about what it is that you do in the Beacon Council. And if I can just at the same time throw in this question that I think plays very well. I know you're very big on diversity and inclusion and making Miami really for everybody, not just for a certain group of people. I'm curious to know how you would rate Miami on the diversity, or rather not the diversity scale, but people embracing diversity. How are we doing on that end? And I'm sure you see that every day.
Well, okay. So I'll start with the diversity, and then let's go to with Opportunity Miami at the Beacon Council, and I'll tell you a little about the work we did at Knight Foundation because that all played into it. So diversity is our great differentiator, right? That is that we are in a place where 54% of our population here across Miami-Dade County was born outside the country, right? That is a higher number than New York, LA, any country, any metropolitan area in the U.S. And that is our great asset, right? Because as we think about things like innovation and entrepreneurship, innovation is built on a diversity of ideas and people, right? Who are bringing their own life experiences, who are bringing, their own ideas, their own particular problems they encounter on a daily basis, and then are working to solve them, right? So the more diversity that we have, the more problems that will be solved, the more innovation and entrepreneurship that will benefit from, right? And that's why diversity is so critically important and our great, great asset. I mean, I think really what's in front of us is here in Miami, as we think about talent and as we think of talent development and talent and inclusion, is that what's in front of us is that we can really do that well. Miami can build a uniquely skilled and diverse workforce, unlike any regional workforce in the hemisphere, right? I mean, I really think that that's what's in front of us. Now, in terms of how we're doing, I think we're, on the one hand, I think in so many ways we're a model for the country, right? If you want to see where the country's going, come to Miami, right? In some ways, Miami is a leading indicator for the US and in many respects the world. But of course, we can always do better. I mean, as one person said to me, Miami is more of a salad than a melting pot, right? We're all sort of closer to each other and we're all sort of in close proximity, but in terms of that real sort of engagement, that's less so. And I think, and take that to heart. And so I think this is a work in progress. Um, but it is something that is our enormous asset and something where Miami can really be, particularly at a time we're talking earlier about sort of the polarization that we see, that Miami can be a real global leader. Now, you wanted to know about sort of the work doing now, and so let me see if I can connect these. So when I left the Miami Herald as a journalist, and as I mentioned, really I'd fallen in love with Miami and wanted to be part of the story of Miami. And Miami is a place unlike so many other cities where I think each one of us can lean in and really sort of shape the trajectory of our city. And so joined Knight Foundation for that very reason, wanted to be a role where it could proactively try to imagine where we can go next and try in a small way help propel that. And so joined Knight Foundation, and the CEO at the time, a guy named, who's still there today, Alberto Abarguin, said, go talk to people for 4 months and come back and tell us what you think is next in Miami and what you'd like to focus on. It just has to be one thing. So this is early 2012. Went and looked around. I thought, well, I'll be a reporter. I'll report out the story of what's next for Miami. And there have been lots of work around building the arts community in Miami and the redevelopment of our urban core in Miami becomes so international. And so I thought, I remember very vividly going back to his office and sitting down. And he said, so what is it? And I said, want to launch an effort focused on building a tech and startup community in Miami, right? That as we think about what's next for Miami tech, and this was 10 years ago. And the thesis was that talent, people, and funding investment would become more mobile. While we have these primary centers of innovation, Silicon Valley being Exhibit A, that ultimately you'd see people and funding begin to move a little bit. Those primary centers of innovation wouldn't go away, but these new places would emerge. And Miami could be one of those places, right? And so let's go about building an ecosystem to do that. So, funded more than 200 grants of different shapes and sizes, provided the initial funding for Emerge Americas, provided and recruited Endeavor here, and provided the funding to launch the very first Endeavor affiliate in the US, and doing it right here in Miami, provided the funding to launch, the Lab Miami in its location on 26th Street in Wynwood when there's no co-working in Miami, and on, and going about the work of working to build an ecosystem here. So to see where we are today is so exciting. And so now then, of course, I went off on my adventure as a congressional candidate after more than 6 years at Knight Foundation. And then afterwards decided that I thought that was an extraordinary experience, but that is not how I want to spend my time and effort in my next chapter. And so I was looking around, but I thought I want to do one more thing here focused on Miami. And the Beacon Council reached out, the CEO, the late CEO, Mike Finney, reached out and said, hey, we have this initiative called One Community, One Goal. What about if you come on board and lead that? And One Community, One Goal is an initiative focused all on where does Miami go next, right? Very intentionally pulling out of the here and now, but instead thinking about the Miami of the next 5 years, 10 years, the next 20 years, the Miami of 2040, right? When the child today we're entering the workforce. What's that look like? And so I said, well, I love the mission, and sort of gives an opportunity to build on all the work I'd done at Knight Foundation before running for office. And so dove in, and similar to Knight, did a deep dive and came back and said, I think the mission is so important, but time for new name, new focus, new strategy. So the new name is Opportunity Miami. Launched, a little more than a year ago. And that comes from the whole idea that our biggest challenges present our greatest opportunities. And I really believe that firmly. Number two, a focus, 3 areas, right? One, continuing all the work around driving entrepreneurship and innovation. We want to be a community of starters and restarters, over and over again. That's the goal. Of course, we want companies moving here. We want this to be a place filled with entrepreneurship. Two, talent and inclusion, right? Goes without saying, the places that provide ways for people to build skills, affordably, quickly, over and over again throughout their lives. Those are the places that'll win. Miami can be that place. And as we said, if we do that well, we have this great prize. And then the third thing is sustainability and resilience from a business perspective. And this is perhaps new. And as I think about sort of the next 10 years, really think climate, it's not something that we have to, it is something to do to solve an existential crisis for sure. But I would say it is the thing that will propel our economy and create jobs going forward. And so really leaning into the transition to a net zero economy as the thing that can really differentiate us, because we're seeing our entire economy switching. We're already seeing in the auto industry going to EVs, right, with Tesla leading the way. The thesis is that we're going to see that in every industry. And the places that build the zero carbon companies of the future will lead the global economy. Well, let's be one of those places.
Yeah. Matt, are you seeing more college students when they graduate staying local? Because I know a problem used to be that a lot of graduates would go outside of Florida because we just didn't have, these attractive jobs for them. So we would lose a lot of talent in Miami and in Florida. Are you seeing now, a couple years into this tech movement, I like to call it not a moment, but a movement that Mayor Suarez and other folks like yourself have really been behind? Are you seeing more talent retaining, staying here locally?
I think we've been seeing it some time. I mean, the whole tech effort is more than 10 years in the making, right? And of course, during COVID and the How Can I Help tweet by Mayor Suarez, all of that has really been an accelerant of this ongoing work, right? And we've seen all these people coming here, which is amazing, and taking this big leap. Although, for people interested in the tech and startup community, understand we're in like the bottom of the second inning, to use a baseball metaphor, right? These are still early days.
Sure,
And so
sure.
for people to come in and shape it and lead it, it's there.
Yeah.
But yes, I would argue, and I would argue going back even pre-COVID, when we saw such a huge surge, that we've been in the middle of a brain game, right? That I know for me, I mean, going back to the work at Knight Foundation before leaving to run for Congress, that that was seeing more and more people who are choosing to come back or choosing to come here, right? And so yes, I'm certainly seeing a lot more of that. In fact, just on our recent Opportunity Miami podcast, we sat down with the mayor's economic development chief, who grew up here, left, was working at Facebook and the White House and all these different roles, and is now back. So seeing much more of that. Yes.
So I want you, Matt, in 17 years from now, to come back to this episode and listen to your answer to the following question you're about to share with us. What
Man, I love it.
will
By the way, I love these deep questions. You're asking some of the stuff you're asking, I hadn't thought about for a while. Man, I hadn't reflected on the
we're
campaign in
getting the
quite a while.
juices flowing here? We're getting the juices.
I
Um,
know, right?
in 17 years, you're gonna come back, listen to this episode, because in 17 years from now, it'll be 2040, and the question is, what will Miami look like in 2040?
So, you know, I really want I where I put the eggs that I put my basket in, as I really think climate tech, from an economic standpoint, is the thing that Miami can own, right? And want Miami to be the global climate tech hub, the place where the zero carbon companies of the future. As we think about what the Tesla will be in home building, and the Tesla will be, in food production, and all of that, right? That those are being launched here, and all the latest innovations are tried here, and it's within a context of a place that is uniquely international and diverse, that really stands out as a place that is sort of living its values in such a pronounced way. And by that, and what those values are, to me, Miami superpowers are an open mind, right? We're willing to consider new ideas in a way that I think lots of places aren't. A welcoming spirit, right? As when I arrived here, I found a place that embraced me, right? We can never lose that. And as more people come here, we embrace them and say, you make this community your own. You put your own stamp on that place. And we've seen that again and again. And then the third thing is always embracing the Miami hustle, right? the grit, the stick to itiveness that has defined Miami, the resilience that has defined Miami for so long, and having that. So, this place that is built on innovation, particularly as it is around building that net zero economy of the future, in this uniquely diverse and international city.
And Matt, I think I'll put money on that because you have quite the credibility. I mean, over 10 years ago, you could have guessed that we're gonna be living this Miami tech movement, and maybe we didn't see it then. You definitely saw something in Miami that quite a few people might have missed at that time. And I want to ask you, I think obviously it was a progressive thing. And like you said, even pre COVID, you started to see much of a surge in the students staying. Maybe some tech companies were migrating down to Miami. But I can't imagine it was an easy process, especially over a span of 10 years. At what point were you like, okay, this is actually like my hypothesis is correct, right? Because I'm sure you guessed it and you were like, or not guessed, but you had some research around it and you had some, some things that you had done and talked to some people about what you were noticing. But at what point did you like, okay, like this is actually happening when you had gone to the CEO of the Knight Foundation, like, hey, like tech movement in here 10, 15 years is going to be big here in Miami. Like at what point were you, oh man, I scored. I got it. Like at what point did you realize that?
It's really interesting. Almost from the very first day. I know that sounds crazy, right? Um, but there's this sort of concept of you'd rather have a core group of people that believes passionately and deeply in something rather than lots of people who are sort of ambivalent, right? And immediately we had this core group that was so passionate about this. I remember on, dear friend, Wilfredo Fernandez, who launched the Lab Miami. I remember then we funded then with four partners the launch of the new co-working space on 26th Street in Wynwood. Back when we were asking questions like, where will there be a tech community? And literally sitting around a table and said, the Miami tech community will be in Wynwood, right? Those are the kind of conversations we were having. And then, and then the lab in its bigger version stayed in Wynwood after Wi-Fi had done the first smaller version there. And I remember it was a Saturday, that first day that when we had folks come in and launched, and there was such energy and there were so many people there. You felt like you were at the center of the universe. Now, it probably was, 150 people, right? But they were all so committed that I remember walking out that evening and saying, oh, this is happening, right? This is going to happen, and then work to then continually build. Of course, in any effort, which is a long game, there are lulls and setbacks, you know. But at the end of the day, there was never a moment after once we got started, and I remember, in particular that day, we thought this is going to happen. This is where Miami's going next. So lots of things are filled with, huge doubt along the way for whatever reason. Gabe, I don't know. This was something where from the moment we started, it felt like this is right and this
Yeah.
is going to happen.
And it seems like the right people were at the right place at the right time to make this happen, which is
Yeah.
fantastic, right? You have the Saifi Shufs who are pushing this along, and the Venture Miami team. We just had Keith Carswell on, so do you want to elaborate a little bit about that, about how the people
100%.
around it?
I mean, I think it's so great, and everyone jumping in,
Yeah,
and the city of Miami launching Venture Miami, and the
sure.
work that Saif was doing to get Venture Miami off the ground, and then Keith now and Eric Gavin. And I think what this shows is stuff like this, it's a community effort, right? I mean, ultimately, in starting this, the whole idea, going back to the early days, is we want to build an ecosystem, right? It's not top down. In fact, I remember we visited some places where they were trying to launch tech ecosystems, and it was very top down, right? It was like there were one person or a couple of people, and everything sort of went through them. And our thought was, and by the way, I say the person who did this was a guy named Ben Wers, who was at Knight Foundation too. He now lives in London and he runs a venture, he leads a venture capital firm there. But we very intentionally thought, the whole idea here is building an ecosystem with lots of champions, lots of ways that people can engage, lots of ways that people can use this ecosystem, to whatever it is that they're trying to do, whatever problem that they're trying to solve, whatever company that they're trying to build, whatever it might be. And understand that this is something that's going to grow and change. And now, like for example, we've seen the all the folks coming from SF, you know, and now very much making it their own, right? And we see people saying, that this is the real, Miami Tech Week, right? Oh, good, right? I think that this is, everyone making it, treating this as their own, caring deeply about it, and building it in their own way. But ultimately, I think just collectively understanding that this is a community effort.
Matt, if you could start from scratch, if you can go back, I don't know, middle school, high school, as you're starting your career in the very early ages, and you have the opportunity to start again or do something differently, looking back and connecting the dots, is there something you would do differently? And if so, what would that be?
It's such a great question. The short answer is no. Um, it's as I think back to each moment where I made a decision. Like I decided early on, and have seen friends, who they knew early on they want to do one thing, and they've spent, one thing professionally, and they've spent their whole professional life doing that thing. And that's a real gift, right? Having that clarity about what you want to do. In fact, that's an enormous gift, right? Um, for me, I knew early on that I wanted to lead a life where I was doing lots of different things, right? Which presents its own challenges, right? That is that I have friends who are well along in a career in one area. Meanwhile, I'm starting a new thing, well into my professional life, right? And that requires, by the way, a mindset of always being willing to start anew, even if you're further down the road. But I decided I wanted to have chapters, right? And as I think about the different turns in the different chapters and going into journalism, deciding to go to Knight Foundation, deciding to run for Congress, now deciding to lead this initiative, Opportunity Miami, at the Beacon Council, leaning into the question of where we go next as a community. Um, I don't think I would make any of those decisions differently. Have I wondered about them? I mean, shoot, I ran for Congress, and 6 months in, we were feeling great, and then of course we got a surprise that none of us expected. Donna Shalala jumped into the race, and things, as I say, got complicated. You know, and of course she went on to Congress, and that was really hard, right? I mean, spending such an intense period, and leaving everything behind, right? Burning the boats, and then going to do this and then losing, that's really hard, right? But I learned so much from that experience. um, Furthermore, I do think that if you look at most successful lives, it's going to include failures. In fact, the most successful for sure includes failures, right? Because it's built on trying things. And so as I think about that, I don't think I would do with everything differently. I think for me, I just want to live a life going forward, again, professionally, where I can take smart risks, willing to take leaps, and not be afraid to lose. And, after going through an experience where I did lose, it's very easy to try and sort of find yourself to get back to a safe space where you're not going to experience that again. And I know for me, what I want to do is to fight that urge, right? And be willing to take risks, try new things, which of course will include some step backs. But it feels like success is built on, as we sort of talked about early on, is built on sticking with it, and
Yeah.
just not stopping.
Yeah, I think as you were talking there, I couldn't help but reflect on, I think, a question many of us might have gotten back in grade school, and it's, what do you want to do when you grow up?
Yeah.
Right? And I kind of always ask myself, I keep asking myself that question, and I think you're a perfect example of what we can do, because you know, thinking back on that question, our teachers would always say, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And generations before us might tell us, you got to pick one thing for the rest of your life, work for the same company for 45 years, have a nice retirement, and have a nice life. And I'm kind of on the same boat as you. I kind of like to have my hands in different things, where for some people that might be frowned upon, but I think you're doing it so gracefully, and you're doing it in such a way where you're setting the example for so many people to really keep asking that question. What do you want to do when you grow up at 25, at 35, at 45? Because we're evolving humans. We don't just stop at 25, 30. We're going to continue to grow. We're going to continue to learn. So what do you have to say about that? What would you tell people if they might think that they need to stick to one thing, if they really want to have your hand in nonprofits and startups and business and real estate? What how can someone go about doing that?
Well, I mean, I think it's, one, trying to have as clear an idea as you can of what you want to do. Um, but then ultimately it's built on the doing, right? Of leaning in. Now, as we go in further along in life, there can be, competing pressures that of course you have to take into account. Family considerations, getting, a child through school, all of that, paying the mortgage, right? All those things play into it. And that's why sometimes earlier in life it can be easier to take, bigger risks. That said, you know, at least what I hope to do, as my own life continues, is, hopefully to try and be willing to strike out on new things and try new things throughout life, like aspiring to being in my 60s and being, game for, launching a startup, or trying to sit down and spend the time and effort and hours of writing a book, or whatever it might be, or launching this nonprofit that I think is really focusing on an important issue in our community, and being willing to do that. And you know I think the traits that are involved in having the mindset here on the Mindset podcast to be able to do that are this, competing traits of ambition and confidence and real humility, right? Because whenever you're starting something anew, it's that can always be hard, and that really requires a beginner's mind, a curiosity, a humility. But you also have to really have the ambition and the confidence to go for it and take that leap and work through those moments of real anxiety, to be able to have the discipline to leave those awkward or challenging moments behind, and sort of, and have that ability to sort of, the past is the past.
Yeah.
God, here I can drop the cliches, but the past is the past. The future is a myth. I'm
Yeah.
just focused on, the here and now, and to
Yeah.
be able to do that over and over again. So that's what I hope to do. Um, you know,
Yeah.
as ever, we're works in progress.
Absolutely, and I think you're on the way to doing just that, Matt. And but really, the last question I have for you, and the question everybody wants to know, I don't know why everybody was asking us to ask you this, but we wanted to put you on the
Oh,
record here. Are the Miami Heat going to win the finals? And if so, what game are they winning? What game are they taking it all?
so yes, the Heat are going to win. I mean, I think that this is a tall order. This is a Denver team. The Celtics, there's some dysfunction going on there with the Celtics.
Did you
Um,
lose faith in the Celtics series? Did you think we were gonna end up losing to the Celtics once you saw that we were 3-3? What was your thoughts there?
No, I thought the Heat for
We'll
sure
pull
could
through.
win. I thought it was going to
Okay.
be a very tough game, but I
Yeah.
thought that there are real issues with that Celtic team,
Yeah.
and the Heat have such Heat culture is real.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, there's such a grit and determination. So okay, so you want to put me on the spot? So I will say I think that we're looking at. Um, I think we're looking at Heat in 7, and so the Heat will do turn the extraordinary trick of winning 2 game 7s away, and in this time, not only doing it away, but do it away up in the high altitudes of Denver,
Yeah.
Colorado. There
So
we go,
I love
Heat in
it.
7.
I think what's gonna happen is we're gonna win Game 7. I'm gonna go behind you on that, Matt, and I'm gonna see you. I'm gonna go out there with pot and pans. I'm gonna look to my left, and I'm gonna see you with me on the streets with pots and pans.
Anthony, I'm with you there for
Let's
sure.
go.
I will be out there with pots and pans. Let's go.
Miami way.
We're
Well, there
gonna
you
do
have it,
it.
Matt.
Let's go.
Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, the wisdom that you just shared with us in these last 50 minutes is unexplainable. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the great work that you're doing. I think young people are now realizing, and hopefully with this episode, we'll push your mission along at the great work you're doing at Opportunity Miami and the Beacon Council and beyond. So just thank you for leading the way, and we hope that we can get young people mobilized to also follow in your footsteps and really share this Miami story. I think it's so important that nobody else shares it for us, but we, the Miamians, share our story. And I think you're a big proponent of that. And just thank you for leading the way, and thank you for your time today.
Anthony and Gabe, I so appreciate it. By the way, for you guys and anyone in your audience who wants to engage and follow up, you can always go to opportunity.miami. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can follow us on social channels at Opportunity MIA. And you can always reach me at matt@opportunity.miami. And I really appreciate the time. Thank you. You guys are asking questions and stuff that I hadn't thought about in quite a while. Man, we got kind of reflective there and stuff on life
Yeah.
and stuff. But I appreciate it, and thank you. I really appreciate the time.
No, thank you, Matt. We really appreciate it. And just to echo everything Anthony said, I think this episode is going to go a long way to continue to push your movement along. So we'll do anything in our power to help that. And like we always like to say, you're part of the mindset family now. So you're stuck with us forever.
Awesome. Well, I'm honored. So appreciate it,
Awesome.
guys. Take care.